The Miami Heat hit a new low point of this disappointing season, getting absolutely crushed by the Cleveland Cavaliers. They were missing Jimmy Butler and Tyler Herro, but there's no excusing what was an ugly, listless effort. What went wrong? Can they turn things around, or have the Heat simply stopped caring this early in the season? We break it all down on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. However you might be tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or on your favorite podcast app, thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. Recording this on a Sunday night after the Heat lose to the Cavaliers 113-87. They were without Jimmy Butler, no Tyler Herro, no Gabe Vincent. Victor Oladipo, Omer Yurtseven, Udonis Haslem all still out. Bam did play after not playing in Washington on Friday. He started alongside Nikola Jovic, which we're going to talk about later, that pairing. But without so many guys, you just can't expect to win against a good Cavaliers team. But David, you texted me something during the game that you were concerned by how it seemed that the Heat just gave up, right?
Yeah, something I haven't seen all season, and it's certainly something that we didn't see last year. And that's the comparison point for me, is that we know that last year's group probably overachieved, but I don't think you could ever say that they gave up, especially not this early on in the regular season. They were trying to claw and fight their way for each win, whether they were missing Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, Kyle Lowry, or anybody else in the starting lineup. They just found a way to overachieve, to gut it out, to give their very best. And I don't think we've seen that effort very consistently this season, but I do know that tonight it just seemed like they stopped caring. Like you saw them during that second quarter where they were getting absolutely pummeled after a really strong first quarter. Perhaps that's where the disparity lies for me, is that, they looked engaged, they were moving smoothly, the offense was fluid, they were playing defense with intensity and purpose, intent, right? That's the word that Eric Spoelstra loves to use when it comes to defensive effort. And then the second quarter, they just fell apart. And I'm not sure if it was a personnel change that we'll talk about when we get into our blame pie in the next segment. Certainly that might have been a factor. But even for the starters that were out there, veterans who have a lot to prove this season and are, in theory, competing for a championship each and every year, they look like they just simply didn't care. And that's most concerning, is that this early in the season, it looks like this team has a heavy cross to bear. They're just not comfortable out there. I don't think it's just the injuries, because, again, they battled through that last year. So whether there's tension behind the scenes or in the locker room, or whether or not there are issues that we're not pretty clear on at this point, they've just seemed like they're overwhelmed. Like they're not giving the kind of effort, at least, to compete with these high-end level teams. They got blown out last year. But again, I don't know that anybody questioned their effort. Tonight, I absolutely do. I don't know that they necessarily even cared about showing out against the Cleveland Cavaliers.
I think there's a lot of factors at play. Number one, they went 6 of 31 from three-point range. They would miss and miss and miss threes, and you could just see guys hang their heads.
It's one demoralizing.
Yeah. It's demoralizing. You already know you're hurt. The great equalizer is the three-point line, but not tonight for Miami. 19.4%. That's not a good percentage. You compare that to what Cleveland shot, 13 of 37, 35% from three-point range. Okay, that's an okay number. Way better than what Miami was shooting. They would make threes, even on contested shots. They would make those threes, and then you would see Max Strus or Duncan Robinson or somebody just hanging their head like, all right, they're making these and we can't. Right. You pile that on top of the injuries. Jimmy Butler is such a jolt for this team. The way that he plays on both ends, that energy permeates the rest of the team when he's on the court. The fact that he wasn't available again, and Eric Spoelstra saying he's not going to be back on this road trip, which is a very big deal and very concerning, and something I want to talk about in here in a minute. But yeah, I think you're right. All those things, it did look like they just sort of gave up. I think in this game, those were some of the factors at play. Zooming out a little bit, David, I do think that this team just doesn't play with the same kind of energy, that same level of urgency, that same excitement that we saw last year, right? That team last year, Kyle Lowry, PJ Tucker, new to the team, Jimmy Butler back after getting swept in the playoffs the year before. There was an urgency. There was a hunger with that group that was palpable. And it doesn't exist with this one. It simply does not exist. And I haven't sensed it all season. This is not just me reacting after a bad 30-point loss on a night where you didn't play most of your good players. This has been something that that's been bugging me all year with this team. And again, zooming out here, they have an opportunity now on this road trip. Jimmy Butler, not going to be a part of it. Tyler Herro, he's not coming back. It doesn't look like by Monday night. Neither is Yurtseven, Oladipo. They're missing a lot of guys, but they have a chance to be 7-11 by the time they come back from this trip, playing Washington Wednesday night back here in Miami. If they lose Monday night, they could be 1-7 on the road to start the year. That's simply not good enough. And this one, look, you never want to make excuses, and the Heat will always say next man up, blah, blah, blah. You didn't have enough. Sure. The Cavaliers are too good. You didn't have some of your best players. You were supposed to lose this game, and they did. We could talk about the manner in which they lost, but at the end of the day, it's an L, and that's what was going to happen. But to be 7-11 at this point in the season, 1-7 on the road, that is unacceptable to me.
Yeah, again, we've talked about this pretty consistently since the season started. They gave up a lot of close games. They haven't had any kind of real continuity. They haven't been able to build an identity. Again, even if you point to a talent deficiency or perhaps not having, the young talented players of a Milwaukee or Boston or anything like that. Last year, they at least had veteran grit for all that's worth. And maybe that's overstating it to some degree, but there was an intensity and an urgency. I like that your use of that word that we have not seen this year. They just seem kind of done. And
did they run out of gas? Look, we've seen this time and time. Like the Utah Jazz just blew it up. Why? Not because Donovan Mitchell is not an awesome player, not because Rudy Gobert is not an awesome player, but because that group, that core, hit a wall. And when it hits a wall, you kind of just have to pivot. And we saw this with the Clippers, the Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan Clippers I'm talking about. In the playoffs, every single year, competitive, 50 wins a season minimum. Ultra successful by the Clippers franchise standard, and yet you run into a wall, and eventually that core had a shelf life in LA, and they blew it up. They broke that group up. I'm not saying we're there yet, but it's fair. It's a fair question. Has this has this group hit that wall? Has this core run out of gas?
We talk about it in terms of their offense, right? But you can, again, take a macro view of how it affects this team. When every possession has to be so much work,
yes,
where you have to just fight it out for 24 seconds and hope and pray that maybe you'll get a shot to fall or get a friendly whistle and get to the line. That takes its toll emotionally, physically, etc. They worked so much harder than everybody last year. And this is a group inherently built for that, not just because of the team ethos, not just because of Pat Riley, the front office, between guys like Lowry, Tucker, when he was here last year, everybody on this roster believes wholeheartedly in the work. But that doesn't mean that the work isn't exhausting. You love the work, you appreciate it, but it's still draining. It's still hard.
Even for a team this well conditioned, right? I know they wear this as a badge of honor, and I agree. Like, this is not a team. This is like, what, 8 guys out of the 16? They won't shy away
from the work, but when it leads to losses, especially a 30-point loss or even a close loss early on in the
demoralizing.
Season, it's exhausting.
Demoralizing.
You just can't find any way to come up. It's like, again, if you can hang your head and say, well, we won 4 straight, we'll try and get a 5th straight. But they've lost so consistently. Just for every step they take, seems like they take at least 1 back, if not 2 back. And that's just harder and harder to overcome as you get older, as you have less to feel like you're fighting for something tangible. It's just harder to find and muster that effort to push you through these types of games.
Would we have the same expectations of this group if the Celtics don't collapse at the end of Game 7 and allow Miami a chance to take a shot to go to the finals? Because that was a group, even in Game 7, for the most part, you and I watching Game 7, this team's running out of gas. And they did. Yeah. Jimmy Butler having to play 48 minutes and all these things. Like, they just didn't have enough. And suddenly Boston can't dribble the ball anymore and allows Miami back into the game. Jimmy Butler front rims the 3-pointer. Do we have the same expectations of this team if Joel Embiid is healthy in the second round for the Sixers, and if the Heat lose that series? Quite clearly, I think, and it's almost a rhetorical question, David, the answer is no. There's a big difference. Everybody wants to say, hey, we were a shot from making the NBA Finals. And I kept saying, yes, that is a factual statement. That is true. But it is also misleading. It could be true and also misleading. That team, I don't think that you can look at this group, just like, I shouldn't say just like, it's going to be an unfair comparison, but the way that the Atlanta Hawks went to the conference finals a couple years ago, that was not a conference finals team. It was not a team that close to making the NBA Finals. I think the Heat obviously were factually that close to making the NBA Finals, but I don't think this group is that close to making the NBA Finals, if that makes sense. And I do wonder if the surprising run last year gives this team a different kind of expectation. If they had lost in the second round to the 76ers, a year after getting swept in the first round by the Milwaukee Bucks, are we already kind of looking at this group as maybe like, yeah, maybe this just ain't it? You know, it's been 3 years since a deep playoff run and in the bubble. Is this really the group we want to be riding? I don't know. I think it's a fair question.
It is. I think that's fair. At the same time, you can't just overlook how well Jimmy played and how well they got some great performances from key players. You're right. Maybe if Embiid is healthy and Harden is on the same page and they figured it out last year, which again, that's been the question mark for the Philadelphia 76ers and will continue to be so this season until they prove everybody else right. At the same time, I just, you saw what Jimmy's capable of, and maybe that's it. Maybe that's part of the unfairness here is that, well, we're going to turn to Jimmy in our darkest hour, right? And they keep turning to him, and he was stupidly locked in 2 seasons ago, and they wound up getting swept by the Bucks. And so maybe you're just expecting and hoping too much. Maybe this has all just been some bad dream, an extension of him bent over the stanchion in the Orlando bubble, having given every last ounce of effort that he possibly could, and all just to fall short yet again. And he's fallen short 2 times since then after having carried the team or after having to carry the team. That's the difficult part. It's not just that he's done it and seems willing to do so. It's that he has to, because nobody else has been able to step up.
And if the Heat are going to get, if the Heat are going to get anywhere close to where they got last year, he's going to have to carry even more of this team, because the surrounding talent is not as good as it was last year. For whatever reason, it's just like we said, the urgency, the hunger, whatever it is, it feels like if they're going to get closer, Jimmy Butler has to carry them even more through the regular season, not even to mention the postseason. That, as we know, not a recipe for success. An historic playoff run last year, absolutely, but it's historic for a reason, because you can't count on it, because those kinds of performances are rare, even for somebody as good as Jimmy Butler. Blame Pie is next, and yes, we will find somebody to blame for this loss. We'll also talk about Bam Adebayo-Nikola Jovic and what we think about that front court pairing here in a bit. But first, today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Unfortunately, life doesn't come with a user manual. So when it's not working for you, it's normal to feel stuck. Navigating any of life's challenges can make you feel unsure, whether it's a career change, a new relationship, or becoming a parent. Therapists are trained to help you figure out the cause of challenging emotions and learn productive coping skills, which makes therapy the closest thing to a guided tour of the complex engine called you. BetterHelp has connected over 3 million people with licensed therapists. It's convenient and accessible anywhere. It is 100% online. And as the world's largest therapy service, BetterHelp has matched 3 million people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists, available 100% online. Plus, it's affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with a therapist. If things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. It could not be simpler. No waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. That's BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. David, it's that smelly smell that you're smelling is that smelly smell of another blame pie being cooked up, the third straight blame pie whipped up by this Miami Heat team. Where do we begin? Because I think ultimately you chalk this one up to injuries. Jimmy Butler's not available. Victor Oladipo, Omer Yurtseven, Herro, all these guys are still out. It's just so hard to win a game on the road against a good Cleveland Cavaliers team without your guy. And a Cavaliers team that's welcoming back Darius Garland recently, and they're mostly healthy. So we could just say, hey, look, just chalk it up to injuries. But I do think, you got Kyle Lowry out there. You got Bam Adebayo. And you were shorthanded, especially on the bench, but maybe there is some expectations to at least maybe not win this game, but maybe you could have still gotten better performances from up and down the roster somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's fair too. I just, they're missing 2 starters and so a couple of key bench players. But again, and maybe it's unfair, but the comparison to last year seems, like it should be made, because this was a team that always gave effort. Again, maybe it was exhausting. Maybe it was just a lot of work. Maybe it was just overachieving. Maybe it was the fact that guys like Max Strus and Gabe Vincent weren't on any scouting reports at any point in time and found a way to overachieve. But yet they just haven't given the same effort consistently this year. So it's pretty much all across the board. It's hard to pinpoint any one player that struggled the most tonight. But
Well,
if I
let's
have
start.
to say,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, if there's one player that I think deserves the most blame, and again, this is another symptom of the big Heat problem that they're counting on so many under-talented players to overachieve every night. It's Haywood Highsmith. He goes into the game and he provides the exact opposite of whatever Nikola Jovic had provided in the first quarter. Like the fluidity on offense was gone. You've said it before. When we talked about Highsmith, we talked to him at media day. We were both optimistic that, based on what he was saying, based on what we were hearing around camp, that they had provided these incredible moments and maybe he'd find a way to turn it on. He just does not have a viable NBA skill at a high level. He can't dribble the ball well. He can't rebound well because he's undersized. Can't shoot well. Can't put the ball down. He's not coordinated enough. He's not physical enough. He's just there.
He lacks confidence too, and I think he knows what you're saying. There was a moment, I want to say it was the fourth quarter of tonight's game, where the ball's whipping around. The ball movement was good for once on offense tonight for them, and it's whipping around, and it finds Haywood Highsmith wide open up above the arc. And he takes the three, but he is so hesitant to step into it and do all that stuff that I'm just like, why is he hesitating so much? And it's not the first time I noticed it. He's very hesitant when he's got that open shot. Should I take this? Should I not? Should I keep passing it? He has to make threes. He has to. He's not an elite three-point shooter.
Has he hit a single one all year?
I'm sorry?
Has he hit a single one all year?
I think he did, because I'm going to go back to the game in Washington Friday night, where he's sort of playing without any sort of confidence and just kind of meandering around the court. All of a sudden, he finds himself under the basket, has a tip in, and then as soon as he tips that and gets his first bucket of the game, he plays with so much confidence after that. He hits a three soon after that. He's playing better defense. He's more engaged. He is a guy who really needs to be reminded that he belongs to be on the court, and he wasn't reminded of that tonight. By the way, it's on him to remind himself of that. He needs a moment. But when you go 0 for 3 tonight, and you're just sort of out there, he was Miami's worst player by minus 23. I agree. I think we can. He's not to blame for this loss. Haywood Highsmith is not going to win you this game, but we have to. We have 10 slices of blame pie. We got to give it out. I want to give him a couple slices. I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think 2 is fine. Again, it's the drop off from a player in Jovic already being tasked and expected to do too much more that he probably should be capable of as a 19-year-old rookie.
Yeah.
And then the drop off from that to whatever it is that Haywood provides or doesn't provide is so sharp that it feels the most egregious. And this is, again, not fair. It's just, you don't have a starting quality NBA power forward. You're slotting Nikola Jovic into that position and hoping for the very best. And then you get something out of him, and then you get less than nothing out of Haywood, and that's just where it starts with him.
And then the front court in general was shorthanded. I mean, even Dwayne Dedmon, he was a -10 tonight. Wasn't his best game either. But a really tough matchup when you're going against super athletic bigs and Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen on the other side. No Kevin Love for Cleveland tonight, but that doesn't really matter because they didn't need him. I think that the Heat, they started Jovic and Bam for a reason. Number one, you just need the size, the height to match up against Cleveland. I also think that there's part of them that just wanted to see it. Again, we'll talk about that in the next segment. But the bench overall, I just think needs to be called out. This was actually a close game until the bench came in. And then in that second quarter, the Cavaliers go on that 23-2 run. The Heat don't score, they score just 2 points for over 7 minutes. That's the game. I mean, that was the game. Yeah. You go 7 minutes scoring 1 basket, and you allowed Cleveland to score 23 points in that time without somebody like Jimmy Butler to kind of will the offense back into the game. That's the end of it. Game over. And the bench is to blame. Zooming out again here, because I think the conversation we want to have is bigger picture. The Heat are going to go into Monday morning with one of the bottom 5 benches in the NBA. Maybe you can blame that there's no Yurtseven and no Oladipo all season long, the fact that Tyler Herro has been elevated to the starting lineup when he's healthy. Whatever you want to call it what it is. The fact is that they have one of the worst 5 benches in the NBA so far this season. So I do wonder, do we have to give some blame pie to this front office? Do we have to give the blame pie to just how the fact that this is the team that they built? The fact that they don't have a power forward on the roster, and you have to play guys like Highsmith out of position and Caleb Martin out of position. Even Jovic, you have to over-reliant on him against a playoff team in Cleveland. I don't know. I really don't know where to go with this. I mean, I kind of just want to give the bench all this blame pie.
Yeah, that's not a bad way to take it either. Again, it just doesn't feel like it was any one player so much as this general malaise among the bench unit. They came out
Yeah,
there and were like, okay, we've got something to build off of. Let's just do nothing with what we've got. And again, it's not fair to make that comparison, perhaps because Cleveland is a good team, as you pointed out, a
very
quality
good
team
team.
with
Yeah.
high level energy, high level athletic athletes out there, and just they just couldn't compete.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because you've got all these guys that have been propelled in the starting lineup, like Caleb, Max, and everybody that should have provided a boost off the bench,
Yep.
and they're just not able to do so. So, yeah, I guess the front office deserves, if not one, perhaps two slices of pie, because you're tasked now, and I guess you can never count on injuries, you can never expect them, and you don't know exactly how it's going to impact your team. But at the very least, you should have been able to say, you know what, instead of putting all your eggs in Kevin Durant or in acquiring Donovan Mitchell or anything like that, just even a basic quality level,
Just a rotation power forward. Yeah, just a power forward on the roster. Good. It would be a good start. This team, I don't know. I want to take I want to take the long view on this. Obviously, they still have the assets that they had when they didn't trade for Durant or Mitchell. They're still not hard capped, which makes them a little bit more flexible in regards to maybe getting a trade, making a big splash. Maybe that's ultimately where this is going. I don't know. I just know that even again, this game, you were going to lose this game. This was always going to be. This is a loss with how many injuries you had, and it happens over the course of a season. I'm not overreacting to this loss. What we're talking about is how they've looked so far this season, and all I know is that this ain't it. This ain't it. We did get our first look at Nikola Jovic and Bam Adebayo in that front court duo tonight. Did we see enough to warrant them starting going forward? We debate that next. But first, David, tell listeners about PrizePicks.
PrizePicks, daily fantasy made easy. Look, you could take Luka Doncic to score more than 26.5 points, or you could just bet against the whole Heat starting lineup because you know they're going to miss whatever their projections are over the season. So that's a pretty safe entry right there. That's what I love about it. It's that you just pick 2 to 6 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on every entry. No competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. PrizePicks offers projections in any sport that you watch, including the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, women's and men's college basketball, boxing, disc golf, Euro basketball, everything. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's just that easy. They're safe and fast withdrawals, and they're currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. So download the PrizePicks app, go to prizepicks.com, and sign up to play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100 back. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. So don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKEDON and sign up for an instant deposit match for up to $100 at prizepicks.com or using the PrizePicks app today.
Bam Adebayo-Nikola Jovic started together for the first time Sunday night against the Cavaliers. Let's talk about our impressions of that duo. And I got to say, despite how boring this game was and not fun to watch, it was at least interesting to watch them play together. There was a nice moment in that first quarter. Jovic gets the ball on the pick and roll, short roll pass to Bam Adebayo, 15-foot baseline jumper, drains it, and you're like, all right, I get it. That's the vision. That's it right there. Jovic is such a good passer, and he's got such fast twitch feel for the game that he's got great vision. He just finds the open guy. That wasn't his only good pass of the entire game. He had a lot of really nice playmaking moments. Was actually asked to bring the ball up a couple of times when Spo just said, you know what, that's enough for Bam and Kyle. Let's get him out of there. And he had just Jovic bringing the ball up in the fourth quarter. What was his final stat line here? How many assists did he end up with? 5 assists, and it could have been more if Miami made any of their shots. It could have been 10. I really like what I'm seeing from him. I've been pretty adamant about not starting Jovic just because he's young and because of the defensive concerns there. Interestingly, Miami came out in a zone. They didn't even bother having Jovic try to match up. They just played zone. 90% of their scheme tonight was zone, at least 90%, which I found interesting. But and it obviously did not work because they lost the game. But so there's some defensive things that you got to worry about.
I think he was okay mostly defensively.
You just don't want to be.
There are concerns there.
You don't want to be. Spo is doing that not because Jovic is super awesome at zone. He's doing that because he's worried about Jovic matching up. And whatever, it's fine. I'm more open to it now, just starting them. And maybe that's just because the Heat are 7-10, and I'm like, you know what, screw it, do whatever you want. Let's just see what this looks like. But I am more open to it. I've been so impressed with just his feel for the game when he's on the court. He looks like he belongs.
Absolutely. His IQ, the feel, the court vision. He might see the court better than any player on the Heat roster since LeBron James. And maybe that's really overstating things, but you can see it. Like, he is
The disrespect to Kelly Olynyk.
You're right. Kelly O, we love you, buddy. I just he's like one or two steps ahead. And again, maybe this is a lot of expectation for just a 19-year-old. But I think this is where we're heading, and this is the vision, right? And I think ultimately the best version of this Heat lineup is Kyle Lowry, Max Strus, Jimmy Butler, Nikola Jovic, and Bam Adebayo starting with the same energy Caleb Martin version that we got last year off the bench, and Tyler punching second units right in the face with his three-level scoring and just incredible offensive repertoire. And then all of a sudden, balance is restored to the universe. And this is how it should be. I really, I know there are problems with Jovic, but during a few minutes there, like Miami had a 9-point lead midway through the first quarter before absolutely crapping in the bed. And a lot of that was because of Nikola Jovic. Like, I never thought I would find myself on the couch in game 16 of the season going, put Jovic in. But when Haywood Highsmith is out there for 8 minutes in that second quarter and they're getting blown out, it's clear that they need that offensive spark that only he was able to provide. And by that point, it was a little too late.
I did see quite a few people being like, why is Spo going with Highsmith and Dedmon over Jovic? And the answer is because Jovic ended up playing 32 minutes, and you're not going to play him 48 minutes. Somebody else has to play at some point. That's why Spoelstra is doing that. So I don't want to hear, like, the Heat win this game if Jovic is in there during that 8-minute stretch. I know that's not what you were saying, but I do think that there's a segment of the fan base that does believe that. Learn what rotations are. That's what happens.
Miami's thin right now. They just don't have the depth. That's because of injury, because of everything else.
And I look, you and I do disagree on Tyler Herro and Max Strus. We don't have to have that debate again. We had that on Friday if anybody wants to go listen to that. But my biggest concern was starting Tyler Herro and Nikola Jovic together in a lineup that even includes Jimmy, Lowry, and Bam. Is that now an opponent has 2 weak points that they can target. As good as Jovic has been, he's 19, he's not good defensively, he's going to be targeted. Tyler Herro, we know what's going to happen. My thing is, I don't know that it matters. Because Miami is, 19th in defensive rating, 20th in defensive rating coming into Sunday? It was 19th last I checked. It's probably lower now. Does it matter? You're already bad defensively. And so this is what I would ask you. And it sounds crazy, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. Does this team have a better chance of being top 10 in offense or top 10 in defense this season? Because if you believe that this team has a better chance of being top 10 in offense, then just start Jovic and go for it. Be an offensive team. Be the Houston Rockets. Just go. Be an offensive team. Because and you've pointed this out, the ball moves better when Jovic is in there. There's a fluidity. There's an excitement. And we talk about the malaise, the lack of urgency, the lack of energy out there. Put the 19-year-old's happy to be out there. He might be the only happy player on this roster right now because he's just getting an opportunity. Maybe you just put him out there just for like some sizzle, just the chaos element in there that just, I don't know, just to juice up things, make it more exciting. Maybe there's something to it.
That was a vision. I mean, I talked about it preseason. I thought, based on what we saw from Nikola in those first few games of the preseason, I thought, you know what, let's lean into a heavily offensive group. And I thought that, Spo will always hang his hat on defense, but we've seen enough spark from him embracing a high energy, high octane offense. And if you're going to start Tyler Herro, then that's certainly the way to go. Like, that seems like what you're leaning. Instead, it was a little bit too much like last year, having to work every possession and not having that kind of spark, not having that fluidity. But then Jovic comes in there and he's making passes. I know he's there as a capable scorer, and I think he still has nice enough touch around the rim. If he gets within the paint, there's a good chance. Look, at one point today, he was driving to the paint, had a wide open opportunity there, and then he wound up dishing it to Bam Adebayo for like an 8-foot jumper along the baseline. That was a little off to me, but you know what? Bam knocked it down. And from that point, but Bam started like feeling it. Like, he was aggressive early on in the first quarter. He had 10 first quarter points. And I think a big part of that was because he's playing alongside a natural playmaker who's looking to get him the ball. Bam doesn't have to be the playmaker. He's been asked to do that so often, and yes, he's absolutely capable of it. It's great to have another tertiary playmaker out there, but Kyle's a floor general. Nikola is a secondary playmaker out there at his size, again, who has incredible court vision. frees everything up. Just imagine Jimmy Butler cutting along the baseline, or maybe some of those backdoor cuts we saw from Dwayne Wade later in his career or something like that, and Jovic reading them above everybody else because he's just got the size, he's got the height to be able to do so. And if you've got a guy like Max or Tyler, whoever is at the 2-guard spot as a catch and shoot opportunity, I think you're going to see a much more wide open offense. And look, if you do put Tyler out there, you've got 5 great passers out on the floor. Max is not a great passer, but if there's Jovic out there, Bam, Jimmy, Kyle, and Tyler, that's a lot of great passing and scoring.
And I go back to it. If there's basically no chance of being a top 10 defense, if you don't believe that you could be a top 10 defense this year, maybe you do you just say, you know what? Spo is always going to lean defense. He puts Caleb Martin at the 4 because he trusts Caleb Martin to execute things. Even if he's playing out of position, he trusts him to execute things in a way you can't expect out of a 19-year-old rookie. But if it's not going to matter, if the end result is not going to be a good defense, then maybe you do just say, maybe our best defense is going to be a good offense, and we just lean all. And by the way, maybe you just try it. I do think that Jovic is going to start again next to Bam against Minnesota because they have Gobert and Cat, and like they matched up against Cleveland. They're going to try to do the same thing against Minnesota. I wonder if when everybody gets healthy, if they try to do that long term, namely when Jimmy Butler comes back and plays that other forward spot, you could try it, and if it doesn't work, just put Jovic back on the bench. Guess who's not going to care? Guess who's not going to take that personally? Nikola Jovic, the guy who's, again, just happy to sort of be here right now. At least he kind of gives off that impression. I think you can try it. You could experiment with it. And then if it doesn't work, if you could just see like there's a clear wall with that, a ceiling to it, then you just go back to Caleb Martin at the 4. I think it's just worth the experiment, especially when Jimmy and Tyler Herro are back. So overall impressions, encouraging from Jovic and Bam. We want to see more of it. We probably will Monday night against Minnesota. We definitely will have another recap for you Monday night. Thank you again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Remember to subscribe to new episodes of Locked On Heat on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Ring the bell to get notified as soon as new episodes go up. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for joining me, David.
You got it, Wes.